Christian Wakeford to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Rees. I beg to move that this House has considered real fur sales in the UK. Banning fur is increasingly an issue of public concern, reflected in the decision that the vast majority of consumers now make to avoid buying fur products and the huge support for the Fur-Free Britain campaign, and try saying that 5 times fast, led by HSI International UK. In 2000, this House set an example for the world by banning fur farming in England and Wales, with Scotland and Northern Ireland enacting bans in 2002. We are clearly a nation of animal lovers, and yet our existing legislation on the fur trade contradicts this fundamental aspect of being British. Pressure for change is growing both inside Parliament and among the broader public. Over 1 million people have signed the Fur-Free Britain's petition to ban fur sales, and a group of more than 100 cross-party MPs and peers signed my cross-party letter to the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs just last month, calling on the government to ban the import and sale of animal fur. A similar number of MPs have also signed the live EDM on the same issue, tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Chatham and Aylesford, and the member for Coventry North West tabled a 10-minute rule bill on this particular matter in April of this year. So it is clear that this House members want the animal fur trade to end. I'd be delighted to.
Extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman, not just for securing this debate, but being kind enough to mention the early day motion in my name that's currently live in this session, which actually has the highest number of MPs so far that have signed it. And in the previous session, 140 MPs signed the early day motion. So you agree with me that actually this really signifies or shows that actually there is huge cross-party support on this issue, reflecting public opinion, and that there's really only one outcome from this, is that we should ban fur sales, full stop.
How could I not agree with my honourable friend? The fact I actually name-drop her in my speech as well goes to show that there is clear support from not only in this room, but the Chamber and both Houses. So in introducing this debate, I want to invite honourable friends to imagine a scene, and I apologise in advance for the picture that this is going to paint. So a nearby neighbour is keeping 2 dogs outside the house in a wire cage. The cage measures not more than 1 square metre and has a wire floor and a wire ceiling. The dogs are never allowed to leave this cage and over time exhibit signs of mental distress, taking their frustration out on one another and repeatedly pacing. Over time, one dog's legs become deformed and have open sores from standing on the wire floor. The other has untreated diseased eyes. They have no escape from the intense summer sun nor the freezing winter nights. And one day, the neighbour forces electrical probes into either end of each dog and ends their pitiful lives. So this scene would be utterly intolerable for any right-thinking person. And I imagine that in witnessing such treatment of animals, a great many, if not all, of my colleagues, friends, and indeed the great British public would have called either the police or the RSPCA and rightly expected this individual to be prosecuted for animal cruelty. But in all important ways, the scene I've described is not hypothetical. If we simply switch the animals in the cages from dogs to foxes, and we move a location from Finland to Poland to China, or another in a decreasing list of nations still permitting fur farming, this animal cruelty is a daily reality for far too many animals, with over 100 million animals, foxes, mink, raccoon dogs, chinchillas, and others, all kept like this on a daily basis. I'm a bit delighted to.
The honourable gentleman is making an excellent speech. As well as being cruel, is it not utterly illogical that this country, having rightly taken the decision to ban fur farming here, we continue to be willing to allow the products of cruel fur farming to be imported into the country? And doesn't that strengthen the case, supported by so many honourable and right honourable members, for banning its sale in this country?
Yeah.
I completely agree that it's just a cruel irony that we've illegalised this own practice in the country, but somehow have offshored cruelty, and it's not something that I'm particularly happy about, and hopefully we will see change. So the 5 million or so animals caught for their fur in barbaric traps that are banned in the UK, they're no better. Sometimes they're left languishing in traps for days and often chewing off their own limbs to escape. Our debate today should allow us to discuss whether the UK should be playing any part in an industry that we find so unconscionable in our own country. So despite our previous world-leading progress in banning this outdated and cruel practice, we have since continued to allow the import and sale of fur from abroad, effectively outsourcing animal suffering. Since 2003, we've imported...
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech. Just on the point of wanting to ban imports coming in, at the moment we know the government are interested in doing trade deals with other countries. Could this not be a condition for those trade deals to say that we do not wish to do trade deals with countries who continue to exploit animals in this way?
I completely agree, and in fact, it's almost as if the honourable members read part of my speech in advance. Because if we are exporting cruelty and importing it, then that is fundamentally wrong, and any sane, normal-minded person would find it absolutely intolerable. Since 2003, we've imported more than £800 million worth of animal fur from countries including China, Finland, France and Poland, and HSI estimates that this equates to some 20 million animals. Just to let that sink in, 20 million animals have gone through this cruelty.
Member for giving way and congratulate him on securing this important debate today. Would the member agree that the health risk presented by the fur trade needs to be better publicised so that consumers may make more informed decisions? The intensive breeding conditions in these fur farms lead to poor hygiene, stress and low genetic diversity, creating the perfect breeding ground for disease.
I completely agree with the Honourable Lady. The fact that we have to advertise where our food is coming from, but not where our clothes is coming from, is absolutely just, it's wrong on so many levels. So moving back to my speech, Madam Chairman, we must now be strong enough to eradicate our involvement and hopefully any involvement in the perpetuation of these animals suffering for such a completely unnecessarily unwanted and frivolous purpose as being turned into a pom-pom on a hat or a trim on a collar. If we can legislate that the practice is too cruel to happen in our own country, then indeed we must take the next step and legislate that it is too cruel for us to in effect underwrite in other countries as well. I get the feeling there's an intervention maybe. Oh, I'm inviting one.
But I'm perfectly happy to. And that's really to say to the Honourable, in his representations to ministers, has he had any indication as to the reasons for their reluctance to do something that will be so popular and justifiably so with the public, in order to actually prevent this cruel trade and make a major contribution to eliminating it, not only in the United Kingdom, but also across the planet as well? Wouldn't this really be a major exercise, and one that's fairly simple and straightforward to do?
Again, I completely agree, and hopefully not putting words in the minister's mouth when she addresses the response to this. But it's just the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do, and it's the humane thing to do. So there is overwhelming public.
The Honourable Gentleman, who's making an excellent speech and being so kind with taking so many interventions for bringing this debate today. Would he agree that it's not just a humane thing to do, but there's also a public health interest in making sure that this happens? Humane Society International have reported that there are COVID-19 outbreaks on over 400 mink farms in 12 countries to date. And whilst we're all grappling with a pandemic, surely we must also have public health interest at the forefront of our concerns.
Thank you. It's not a matter I was going to cover in the speech, but the Honourable Lady makes a very educated and well-informed point, which I think certainly in a pandemic Britain that we absolutely need to think of. If we're allowing more people to be infected across the globe, then obviously it's going to eventually come back to our shores as well. Madam Chairman, as I said previously, there is overwhelming public support for a fur ban. A recent Yonder poll in May of this year found that more than 7 in 10 people of the public would support a ban on the import and sale of fur in the UK, including more than 50% who stated their strong support. A YouGov poll in 2020.
The Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I think he makes a very important point, and would he agree with me that whilst there are goods with fur, attached fur pom-poms, for instance, as he indicated, that level of public support suggests that perhaps the public neither know nor wish to be purchasing real fur, and if the government here would take steps to actually prevent that from happening, the public would be very grateful.
Completely agree, and I think when people's shopping habits have fundamentally changed in recent years, there has been a growth in the import of faux fur. But again, this comes down to a labelling issue, and when far too often people who buy faux fur end up wearing real fur, there does need to be a wider conversation around that particular item. As I was saying, a YouGov poll from 2010 revealed that the public consider fashion brands selling real fur to be unethical, outdated, cruel, and out of touch. Is it not time to bring our legislation into line with public feeling and sever our ties with this inhumane industry for good? We also have a duty to protect this nation of animal lovers from unwittingly funding this industry they so despise. And in recent years, scores of British retailers have been found to be mis-selling real fur products as faux fur, as I was just saying, leading unsuspecting customers into propping up the industry. So it's absolutely essential that we take action to prevent this duplicitous practice occurring any longer. Banning fur imports and sales could create appropriate penalties for retailers found to be selling real fur, and so be a significant step forward in this regard.
The Honourable Member Webb. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for giving way and just join my cross-party support here as well for banning the import of fur sales. And would he agree that when we set the standards some 20 years ago by banning fur farming here in the UK, other countries followed our lead? So if we can set the example here, we will not only help animal welfare by what we do as a country, other countries will follow. So let's take the lead. Would you agree?
Completely agree. As I've said in many other and different topics in the Chamber, if we are global Britain, we have a proud reputation across the globe, and when we speak, people should listen. So, other countries have followed us, and we only need to look at Israel, who have a complete fur ban across the country already. Our British high streets do, in fact, generally mirror public opinion on fur. The vast majority of our stores are now fur-free, including Marks & Spencer's, Selfridges and Next, as well as high-end fashion designers such as Stella McCartney, Burberry and Chanel. Businesses are willfully moving away from using fur of their own accord and driven by the most profound moral argument for doing so and changing customer spending habits, and in turn proving that a ban would only have a limited impact on businesses. For the relatively small number of organisations still working in the industry, a managed, phased-out period should ensure that they can transition to any alternative, more humane materials and products. Brexit has given us...
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Would you agree, first of all, that there is, in this day and age, absolutely no justification whatsoever for using real fur because there are so many synthetic alternatives that are good and available? And second, and I don't want to broaden this too far, but is this not, therefore, simply yet another form of trophy hunting? And that this kind of trophy, whether it's a fur coat on somebody's back or an animal mat on a floor, has no place in a civilised society.
I would disagree slightly because I think hunting would try to picture it in some romanticism out there, and that's just not true. It's barbaric, it's cruel, it's not hunting, it's catching animals in traps and then leaving there to bleed out or even worse. So I would disagree on that point, but completely agree with the sentiment that he makes. So Brexit has given us a unique opportunity to forge a new standard for animal welfare and protection in keeping with our values as a country. Previously, 80% of animal welfare legislation came from the EU, and last year the Minister of State, Lord Goldsmith, confirmed that following the end of the Brexit transition period, we will be able to properly consider raising our standards on the fur trade even further. So we must now move forward from those words and legislate for real change. Leaving the European Union has started a new chapter in our trading relationship with the rest of the world, and banning fur will send a strong message that our trading principles will be synonymous with our high standards of animal welfare. Cities, states and countries around the world are implementing their own versions of this legislation, with Israel recently becoming the first country in the world to ban the sale of fur. Our new trading freedoms allow us to become an integral part of this global movement against this outdated industry, and we must not let this opportunity pass us by. Now, supporters of the fur industry, and I know unfortunately there are a few, and I've been trolled by many of them in the last few days, claim that this should all be left purely to the market and consumer choice. Yet despite the unpopularity of fur and its almost complete absence from the high street, the UK is still responsible for importing a large amount of animal fur, and online sales are persistent. We already have in place laws banning the sale of cat, dog and seal fur. We do not leave the fate of these species to market forces, nor should we, for any other fur-bearing animals. A ban on both imports and sales of fur can guarantee ending the status of the UK as a global trading hub for fur. Backers of fur have also claimed that an important and sales ban could jeopardise the UK's effort to strike new trade deals around the world. This claim is little more than hyperbole and fear-mongering. A ban would not only be consistent with our World Trade Organization obligations, but trade in fur is not economically significant enough to make it at all likely to be a red line negotiation issue in any trade deal. May I also take this moment, Madam Chairman, to preempt any suggestion that any such thing as humane fur farming exists. This is a fallacy and a downright lie. But do not take this from me alone. I'd like to read a brief quote from a former CEO of the British Fur Trade Association, who recently, of his own volition, left the industry after 10 years and now supports a fur ban. He said, "Over time, I realised that whatever soundbites we devised to reassure consumers, retailers and politicians, neither welfare, regulations nor any industry certification scheme would ever change the reality in these animals being stuck in tiny wire cages for their entire lives. It is now time that we end the double standard of having a ban on fur farming whilst importing the same cruelty from overseas. The fur industry would appear to me to be an industry that is outmoded and out of touch with modern values and principles for the humane treatment of animals. And I implore my parliamentary colleagues to join me in condemning to the history books, as we have done for so many other cruel and archaic treatments of animals. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, following the call for evidence on the fur trade held by the government over the summer, given the strong public and parliamentary support for this measure, and noting the government's commitment and ambition to be a world leader on animal welfare standards, I ask the Minister to use her response to today's debate to reassure me and everyone in this room today that legislative action to end the UK's involvement in the global fur trade will be imminently forthcoming. It's not just a popular thing to do, it's the right thing to do. I beg to move.
The question is that this House is